Part 1. The World Before Caesar and His Early Life. History remembers few names with as much power, mystery, and lasting weight as Julius Caesar. His name itself became a title, echoed in the words Kaiser and Tsar. His life was filled with ambition, brilliance, and blood. He was a man who rose from the chaos of the Roman Republic, a soldier and statesman whose conquests and reforms would forever reshape the ancient world. But he was also a man whose hunger for power provoked fear, jealousy, and betrayal, leading to one of the most famous assassinations in history. To understand Caesar, we must first understand the Rome into which he was born. Rome, in the 2nd century before Christ, was no longer a small city-state struggling for survival. It had already conquered Italy, defeated Carthage, and spread its influence across the Mediterranean. But with its victories came problems. Vast amounts of wealth poured into Rome, creating deep divides between the rich and poor. Ambitious generals began to overshadow traditional institutions. Violence erupted in the streets, and corruption ran through the Senate. The republic that prided itself on balance and shared power was beginning to tear itself apart. It was into this world that Gaius Julius Caesar was born in the year 100 BCE, on July the 12th or 13th, to one of the most ancient yet modest patrician families in Rome. The Julii clan claimed descent from Iulus, the son of the Trojan prince Aeneas, himself said to be the child of the goddess Venus. From birth, Caesar was tied to myth and legend, and perhaps he believed himself destined for greatness. Caesar's father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, was a respected official in the Roman province of Asia. His mother, Aurelia, came from a noble family of the Aureli Cotai, known for intelligence and strong character. Many ancient sources note that Aurelia was a woman of remarkable discipline and influence, and she likely had a profound role in shaping her son's early life. Caesar grew up in the Subura district of Rome, not the wealthiest neighborhood, but lively and full of politics, soldiers, and ambition. As a young boy, Caesar would have studied reading, writing, and the art of rhetoric, the ability to speak persuasively before crowds, which was essential in Roman public life. He learned not only Latin but also Greek, the language of philosophy and high culture. Stories of Homer's heroes, the strategies of Alexander the Great, and the philosophy of Stoics and Epicureans all formed part of his education. From a young age, Caesar's mind was sharpened, his ambitions fed. But fortune did not always smile on him. When Caesar was only 16, his father died suddenly, leaving him as the head of the household. Responsibility weighed on his shoulders, and soon danger would as well. The dictator of Rome at that time was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a brutal man who had seized power through civil war. Sulla demanded loyalty and crushed his enemies without mercy. Caesar, however, had ties to one of Sulla's fiercest opponents. He had married Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna, a rival of Sulla. To Sulla, this marriage was unacceptable. He ordered Caesar to divorce Cornelia, but the young Caesar, barely 20 years old, refused. For his defiance, Sulla confiscated his dowry, stripped him of his priesthood, and put his life in danger. Caesar was forced to flee Rome, hunted, moving from place to place, living in hiding, and enduring illness and hardship. During these years, Caesar learned survival, courage, and resilience. He also learned the cost of defying power and yet the thrill of independence. Later, Sulla reluctantly allowed him to return, remarking, according to ancient writers, that in Caesar he saw many Mariuses, a reference to Caesar's uncle by marriage, the great general Gaius Marius. It was a warning. In this young man lay the seeds of future upheaval. Once free from Sulla's shadow, Caesar began to build his career. He joined the army, serving in Asia Minor and Cilicia. In battle, he proved himself not just courageous but brilliant. He was awarded the Civic Crown, one of the highest military honors for saving the life of a fellow soldier. Caesar showed not only skill with the sword, but a rare charisma that inspired loyalty. His men would follow him into danger because they believed in him. An episode from these early years shows his character vividly. While traveling across the Aegean Sea, Caesar was captured by pirates. They demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. Caesar laughed at them, declaring they did not know who they had taken. He insisted they demand 50 talents instead, because surely his worth was greater. During his captivity, he treated the pirates not as masters, but as subordinates. He recited poetry to them, joined in their games, and joked that one day he would return and crucify them. The pirates thought he was joking, but once the ransom was paid and Caesar was freed, he raised a small fleet, hunted the pirates down, captured them, and executed them, as he had promised. It was a glimpse of the man he would become: bold, confident, and relentless. By his 30s, Caesar had already made a name for himself as both a soldier and an orator. His speeches in the courts of Rome won admiration. His charm in society won friends and allies. Yet always beneath his polished surface lay ambition. Caesar understood Rome, its politics, its corruption, its hunger for strong leaders. He knew he could rise if he was willing to take risks. And rise he did. He entered politics formally, serving as quaestor in Spain, then as aedile in Rome, where he staged lavish games and spectacles to win the favor of the people. He borrowed money recklessly to finance these displays, putting himself deeply in debt. But Caesar believed in spending for glory, not hoarding for safety. Wealth could be regained. Power, once lost, could never be reclaimed. As his popularity grew, so too did his enemies. Many in the Senate looked on him with suspicion. They saw in him not just a gifted man, but a dangerous one. He had charm, eloquence, and a hunger for command. Rome had seen such men before, and often they ended in dictatorship. But Caesar was not yet ready to seize it all. First, he needed allies. It was then that he formed one of the most important partnerships in Roman history, the First Triumvirate. Alongside Pompey the Great, the most celebrated general of the time, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, Caesar built a political alliance that would dominate the Republic. Each man brought something to the table: Caesar his popularity, Pompey his military prestige, Crassus his wealth. Together they were unstoppable. In 59 BCE, Caesar was elected consul, the highest office of the Republic. His year in office was controversial, full of bold moves and controversial laws, but when it ended, he secured what he truly wanted: a command in Gaul. It was there, on the battlefields of Western Europe, that Caesar would forge his legend. The man who had once been a hunted fugitive, the man mocked by pirates, the man buried in debt, was about to become Rome's greatest conqueror. Part 2. The Gallic Wars, Caesar the Conqueror. When Julius Caesar took his command in Gaul in 58 BCE, few could have predicted that within less than a decade he would transform himself from an ambitious politician into one of history's greatest generals. Gaul was vast, wild, and filled with diverse tribes, many of whom were skilled warriors. To Rome, Gaul was both a threat and an opportunity. A threat because hostile tribes could spill over the Alps and invade Italy, an opportunity because conquering Gaul would bring wealth, slaves, and glory. For Caesar, it was more than that. Gaul was his stage, and the conquest of it would be the foundation of his legend. At the time, Gaul was not a single nation, but a patchwork of tribes: Aedui, Helvetii, Arverni, Belgae, and many others, each with its own leaders, rivalries, and ambitions. Some were allies of Rome, others enemies. Most were unpredictable. Caesar knew that conquering them would require more than force. It would require strategy, diplomacy, and above all, speed. His first great challenge came almost immediately. The Helvetii, a powerful tribe from modern Switzerland, began a mass migration westward, threatening Roman allies. Caesar acted swiftly. He blocked their passage, forcing them into battle at Bibracte. Despite being outnumbered, Caesar's legions fought with discipline and ferocity. The Helvetii were crushed. Caesar did not merely defeat them. He compelled the survivors to return to their lands, ensuring they could no longer threaten Rome. This victory announced Caesar to the tribes of Gaul. Rome had a new master, and he was not to be trifled with. But challenges kept coming. Soon after, Germanic tribes under the fearsome leader Ariovistus crossed the Rhine into Gaul. These warriors were fierce, tall, and terrifying, known for their brutality. Many Gallic tribes feared them. Caesar, however, refused to be intimidated. He met Ariovistus in battle and delivered a decisive victory. The Germans were driven back across the Rhine, and Caesar's reputation soared. By now, his legions adored him. Caesar was not a distant commander. He marched alongside his men, endured their hardships, and shared their dangers. He spoke to them as comrades, not as inferiors. He rewarded bravery and remembered names. To his soldiers, Caesar was more than a general. He was a leader worth dying for. This bond would become one of his greatest weapons. Over the next years, Caesar launched campaigns across Gaul. The Belgae in the north were fierce, but one by one their tribes fell. Caesar's legions built bridges, roads, and fortifications at astonishing speed, moving with an efficiency that shocked their enemies. His engineers performed feats that seemed impossible. At one point, when he wanted to bring the war across the Rhine, Caesar ordered his men to build a massive wooden bridge over the river, the largest in Europe. In just 10 days, they built it, marched across to strike the German tribes, then dismantled it to prove Rome could reach anywhere, any time. It was not just strategy, it was psychological warfare. The tribes learned that Caesar's reach had no limit. Perhaps his most daring expedition was across the sea into Britain. No Roman army had ever attempted it before. In 55 BCE, Caesar crossed the English Channel with his legions. The landing was chaotic. Waves crashed, soldiers struggled to wade ashore under fire, but Caesar personally seized a standard, leapt into the water, and inspired his men to push forward. Though the campaign was brief and Rome did not yet conquer Britain, it was a powerful symbol. Caesar was extending Roman arms to the edge of the known world, but Gaul was not yet subdued. The most serious challenge came from the Arverni and their charismatic leader, Vercingetorix. He was young, ambitious, and determined to unite the Gallic tribes against Caesar. For once, Caesar faced not scattered opposition, but a united front. The war against Vercingetorix was brutal. Villages were burned, fields destroyed, populations displaced. Vercingetorix practiced a scorched earth policy, denying Caesar's legions food and supplies. At Gergovia, Caesar even suffered a rare defeat. For a moment it seemed Gaul might escape Rome's grasp. But Caesar was relentless. In 52 BCE, the two sides met in a climactic showdown at Alesia. Vercingetorix and his army fortified themselves in a strong hilltop city, believing they could outlast Caesar. But Caesar did not attack blindly. Instead, he built not one, but 2 massive rings of fortifications, one surrounding Alesia to contain the Gauls inside, and another facing outward to protect against reinforcements. Imagine it. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers digging trenches, raising walls, building towers, encircling an entire city. It was engineering on a colossal scale. When Gallic reinforcements finally arrived, Caesar's army was caught between enemies inside and outside. The situation was desperate, yet Caesar, calm and commanding, directed his men with precision. In a final battle, the Romans held their lines, repelled the attackers, and broke the will of the Gauls. Alesia was Caesar's masterpiece. Vercingetorix surrendered, and with him the dream of a free Gaul. The tribes submitted, and Gaul became Roman. For Caesar, the conquest was total. He had subdued an entire region, richer and larger than any province Rome had yet taken. He had won unimaginable wealth, thousands of slaves, and above all, the undying loyalty of his legions. But Caesar did more than fight. He wrote. His Commentari de Bello Gallico, the Commentaries on the Gallic War, was his account of the campaigns, written in clear, direct Latin. It was part history, part propaganda, portraying Caesar as the hero of Rome, the defender of civilization against barbarism. The book was widely read, spreading his fame across the Republic. While others relied on gossip or second-hand reports, Caesar told his own story, shaping how history would remember him. Yet, with every victory, Caesar's power grew, and so did fear back in Rome. Senators whispered that he was becoming too strong. His debts were repaid by loot, his allies overshadowed, his legions loyal to him above the Republic. Rome had laws limiting the length of military commands. But Caesar knew that surrendering his army meant surrendering his life. His enemies would prosecute him, strip him of power, perhaps even kill him. For Caesar, there could be no retreat. The conquest of Gaul had given him everything: wealth, glory, loyalty, but it had also given him no way back. The next step was inevitable. Caesar's sword, sharpened in Gaul, would soon turn against Rome itself. The die was almost cast. Part 3. Caesar crosses the Rubicon and the Civil War. By 50 BCE, Julius Caesar stood at the height of his power. He had spent nearly a decade in Gaul, conquering tribes, writing his commentaries, and forging a bond with his soldiers that few commanders in history could rival. Yet while his star rose in the provinces, the political situation in Rome grew darker. The alliance that had once secured his power, the First Triumvirate, was crumbling. Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome and Caesar's key financial backer, had died in a disastrous campaign against the Parthians. Pompey the Great, once Caesar's ally and even his son-in-law, had drifted toward the Senate's conservative faction, the Optimates. Jealous of Caesar's glory, many senators began to see Pompey as their champion against him. Caesar, they argued, had become too powerful, too dangerous. Yet the Senate demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. This was not a simple request. To give up his command meant vulnerability. Without the protection of his legions, Caesar's enemies would prosecute him for abuses of power, strip him of wealth, and likely exile or kill him. Caesar knew it. His supporters knew it. His soldiers knew it. To step down meant ruin. To resist meant war. For months, negotiations dragged on. Caesar offered compromises, willing to give up some power if allowed to keep his consulship, but the Senate, influenced by Pompey, refused. Finally, in January of 49 BCE, the ultimatum came. Caesar must disband his legions immediately or be declared an enemy of the Republic. On a cold winter night, Caesar stood with his army at the banks of the Rubicon, a small river marking the boundary between his province of Cisalpine Gaul and Italy proper. Crossing it with his army would be illegal, an act of war. Ancient writers describe the moment as tense, fateful, charged with destiny. Caesar hesitated, weighing his future against the fate of Rome. Then, according to legend, he spoke the immortal words, Alea iacta est, the die is cast. With that, Caesar led his legions across the Rubicon. Civil war had begun. News of his march spread like wildfire. Panic gripped Rome. Pompey, unprepared for Caesar's speed, fled the city with many senators, retreating to the south and then across the sea to Greece. Caesar entered Rome without a fight, seizing the treasury and presenting himself not as a destroyer, but as a restorer of order. Yet he knew the true battle lay ahead. Pompey still commanded legions, still had allies, and still had the Senate's official backing. The war that followed was not a quick affair but a struggle across continents. Caesar moved first to Spain, defeating Pompey's legates there with characteristic swiftness. "I go to meet an army without a general," he declared, "then I will meet a general without an army." His strategy was ruthless. Isolate Pompey, dismantle his bases of support, and force a direct confrontation. That confrontation came in 48 BCE at Pharsalus, in central Greece. Pompey had the advantage in numbers, his army larger and better supplied. The Senate believed victory was certain, but Caesar trusted his veterans. On the morning of battle, he addressed them with calm resolve, reminding them of their triumphs in Gaul, their shared hardships, and their loyalty to one another. The battle was fierce. Pompey's cavalry pressed hard on Caesar's flank, but Caesar, anticipating the move, had placed a hidden reserve of infantry. At the critical moment, they surged forward, throwing Pompey's horsemen into confusion. Caesar's legions advanced with deadly discipline. By day's end, Pompey's army was shattered. Pompey himself fled the battlefield, a broken man. He sought refuge in Egypt, hoping for support from the young pharaoh Ptolemy III. But here, betrayal awaited. Fearing Caesar's wrath, Ptolemy's advisers had Pompey murdered as he stepped ashore, presenting his severed head to Caesar as a gift. When Caesar saw the head of his old ally and rival, he is said to have wept. For all their enmity, Pompey had been a great Roman, a man whose fall marked the tragedy of civil war. Caesar ordered Pompey's assassins punished, but Caesar's presence in Egypt would bring new entanglements. The kingdom was in turmoil, with young Ptolemy III locked in a struggle with his sister Cleopatra for the throne. Caesar, ever pragmatic, aligned himself with Cleopatra. Ancient sources describe her charm, her wit, and her ability to captivate. Caesar was nearly 50, Cleopatra barely 21. Yet their union was both political and personal. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra secured her throne, and in time she bore him a son, Caesarion. In Alexandria, Caesar demonstrated both his brilliance and his recklessness. Besieged by Ptolemy's forces, he fought a desperate defense, at one point ordering the burning of ships in the harbor, a fire that spread and, according to legend, damaged parts of the great library of Alexandria. Yet, as always, Caesar survived and prevailed. Ptolemy III drowned while fleeing battle, and Cleopatra reigned as queen, allied to Rome through Caesar. From Egypt, Caesar moved east, where the remnants of Pompey's supporters regrouped. At Zela in Asia Minor, he crushed King Pharnaces in a swift campaign, sending back to Rome his famous report, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. But still the war was not over. In Africa, the Senate's last loyalists, led by Cato the Younger, held out. Caesar pursued them, winning a bloody victory at Thapsus. Cato, refusing to submit, took his own life, an act that to Caesar's enemies symbolized the death of the Republic's old virtue. Finally, in Spain, Caesar faced the sons of Pompey at the Battle of Munda in 45 BCE. It was one of his hardest fights, with both sides evenly matched. Caesar himself, now in his mid-50s, is said to have taken part in the front line, rallying his men. When victory came at last, it was complete. His enemies were dead or scattered. Civil war was over. Rome belonged to Caesar. Yet victory brought new challenges. The Republic was shattered. The Senate still existed, but its authority was hollow. Caesar held the real power. He was declared dictator, not for the usual 6 months, but for 10 years, and soon, for life. He began to reshape Rome, not only with reforms, but with the image of himself as its savior. The man who had crossed the Rubicon now stood at the center of history, worshipped by many, feared by more. But power in Rome was never safe, and Caesar's climb to the pinnacle had only made the fall beneath him steeper. Part 4. Caesar the Dictator. Reforms, Ambition, and the Road to Assassination. When Julius Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed victor of the Civil War, he was no longer just a general, no longer just a politician. He was the master of the Roman world. His enemies were dead or scattered, his legions undefeated, his power absolute. But Rome was not yet ready to call him a king. The Republic, though battered and hollow, still clung to its traditions. Dictators had existed before, but their rule was temporary, meant to stabilize the state in times of crisis. Caesar's dictatorship, however, was unlike any before. In 46 BCE, the Senate appointed him dictator for 10 years. Not long after, he was named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. These titles shattered precedent. To his supporters, Caesar was the savior of Rome, a man who had restored order after years of chaos. To his enemies, he was a tyrant, a man who sought to crown himself king. Caesar understood the power of image. He appeared merciful, pardoning many of his former enemies, including men who had fought fiercely against him. This clemency won him admiration, but it also planted seeds of resentment. Those who accepted his mercy did so at the cost of their pride. They owed their lives not to the Republic, but to Caesar personally. Many never forgave the humiliation. At the same time, Caesar launched a wave of reforms. He restructured the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, which, after minor adjustments, remains the basis of the one we use today. He expanded the Senate, adding men from across Italy and even the provinces, weakening the old aristocracy's dominance. He passed laws to settle veterans on land, to relieve debts, to reform taxation, and to reduce corruption in the provinces. He began vast building projects, envisioning a Rome that was not merely the capital of Italy, but the capital of the world. Caesar also dreamed of grand campaigns, against Parthia in the east, against tribes beyond the empire's borders. He imagined Rome not just as a Mediterranean power, but as a universal empire. Some sources suggest he even considered codifying Roman law, reforming the empire in ways that might have provided stability for centuries. But ambition has its price. Caesar's growing dominance alarmed the guardians of tradition. Many senators feared that he intended to abolish the Republic altogether and crown himself king. The word rex, king, was poison in Roman politics, for centuries after their ancestors had overthrown their monarchy. Even the suggestion of monarchy was enough to spark outrage. Incidents only deepened suspicion. At public festivals, some supporters placed a crown on Caesar's statue. At the Lupercalia festival in 44 BCE, his ally Mark Antony offered him a diadem before the cheering crowd. Caesar refused it, twice, but the damage was done. To many, it looked like a rehearsal for kingship. Meanwhile, Caesar's personal life added to the drama. Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, visited Rome, staying in one of Caesar's villas. Their relationship was no secret, and she brought with her their son, Caesarion. To the Romans, this was scandalous. A foreign queen parading through Rome with the child of their dictator? It seemed to confirm their worst fears, that Caesar dreamed of a dynasty, of ruling not as a Roman magistrate but as a monarch. The Senate grew restless. Beneath their outward obedience, conspiracies began to stir. Among the plotters were men Caesar had pardoned, men he trusted. Chief among them were Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Brutus was particularly symbolic. Descended from the legendary Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who had helped overthrow Rome's last king centuries earlier. To kill Caesar, many believed, would be to restore the Republic. As spring of 44 BCE approached, Caesar prepared for his great eastern campaign against Parthia. He planned to leave Rome in just a few weeks. To the conspirators, time was running out. If Caesar left with his legions, he would return more powerful than ever. They had to act quickly. The fateful day came on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44th BCE. On that morning, omens abounded. According to ancient writers, Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, dreamed of his body drenched in blood, and she begged him not to attend the Senate session scheduled for that day. Soothsayers warned him to beware the Ides of March. For a time, Caesar hesitated, but finally, persuaded by friends, and perhaps by his own pride, he went. He entered the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting. There he took his seat. At first, all seemed calm. Then the conspirators gathered around him. One man, Tullius Cimber, approached as if to ask a petition. Suddenly, he seized Caesar's toga, pulling it down from his shoulders. It was the signal. Steel flashed. Daggers plunged. Caesar struggled at first, trying to resist. According to some accounts, he cried out in shock, "Why, this is violence!" But as the blades kept coming, he saw among his attackers Brutus. Brutus, whom he had spared, whom he trusted. Whether he said the famous words, "Et tu, Brute?" "You too, Brutus?" We cannot know for certain, but ancient writers agree. At that sight, Caesar ceased to fight. Covering his face with his toga, he fell beneath 23 wounds. Julius Caesar, the conqueror of Gaul, the victor of civil war, the man who dreamed of empire, was dead. The conspirators believed they had saved the Republic, but instead they had unleashed chaos. When the news spread, the Roman people did not rejoice. They mourned. Caesar was not seen as a tyrant by the masses, but as a hero, a benefactor, almost a god. At his funeral, Mark Antony read his will, revealing that Caesar had left money and land to the people of Rome. He displayed Caesar's blood-stained cloak, stirring the crowd to fury. Riots erupted. The conspirators fled for their lives. Rome plunged into another round of civil wars. Caesar's death had not saved the Republic. It had doomed it. Part 5. Aftermath, Octavian's Rise, and Caesar's Eternal Legacy. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March, 44th BCE, was meant to save the Roman Republic. Instead, it destroyed it. The conspirators had expected the Roman people to hail them as liberators, to celebrate the fall of a tyrant. But they had misjudged. The Republic was already broken, and Caesar had become, for the people, more than just a ruler. He was a symbol of stability, a champion of the poor, a man who had forgiven enemies and given generously to his city. His death left a void, and into that void poured anger, grief, and the hunger for vengeance. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally, seized the moment. As consul, he took control of Caesar's papers, treasury, and personal effects. At Caesar's funeral, he delivered one of the most famous speeches in Roman history. Holding aloft Caesar's blood-soaked toga, Antony displayed the wounds, naming each conspirator responsible. He read Caesar Ius will aloud. Caesar had left every Roman citizen a gift of money and bequeathed his gardens to the public. The crowd erupted in rage. They rioted, hunted conspirators, and burned their houses. The men who had struck down Caesar now fled for their lives. But Antony was not alone in seeking to inherit Caesar's mantle. From the shadows emerged a surprising figure, a young man named Gaius Octavius, Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son, barely 18 years old. In his will, Caesar had named Octavian as his heir, granting him not only his fortune but also his name. From that moment, the youth was known as Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. To the veterans who had fought for Caesar, to the people who adored his memory, this boy was more than just an heir. He was Caesar reborn. At first, few took Octavian seriously. He was young, frail, inexperienced. Antony, a seasoned commander, dismissed him as a child. But Octavian was no ordinary youth. He possessed a cold intelligence, a patience, and a ruthless ambition that would soon outmatch even Antony's strength. Civil war flared once more. Octavian formed an uneasy alliance with Antony and Marcus Lepidus, creating what came to be known as the Second Triumvirate. Together, they vowed to avenge Caesar's death. What followed was a reign of terror. Lists of enemies of the state were drawn up. Thousands were executed, their property confiscated. Among the victims was Cicero, the great orator who had spoken against Antony. His hands and head were nailed to the rostra in the Forum as a warning. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of Caesar's assassination, had gathered armies in the east. The triumvirs marched to confront them. The decisive clash came in 42 BCE at the twin battles of Philippi. There, Antony and Octavian's forces crushed the assassins. Brutus and Cassius each took their own lives, choosing death over capture. The dream of restoring the Republic died with them. Now, Rome belonged to Caesar's heirs, yet the alliance was fragile. Lepidus soon faded into obscurity, leaving Octavian and Antony as rivals. Antony, entangled with Cleopatra in Egypt, alienated many Romans who feared he was placing loyalty to the queen above loyalty to Rome. Octavian exploited this, portraying Antony as a traitor, a man enslaved by an Eastern temptress. In 31 BCE, the conflict came to a head at the naval battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general Agrippa, decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled to Egypt, where, a year later, both took their own lives rather than fall into Octavian's hands. Octavian returned to Rome as sole ruler. In 27 BCE, the Senate granted him the title Augustus. With him began the Roman Empire. The Republic, in name, still lingered, but in reality, Caesar's death had paved the way for monarchy. Augustus was careful never to call himself king, but he held supreme power. The Republic had died with Caesar, and in its place his heir built something far greater. Thus, Julius Caesar's legacy lived on. His name became a title, borne by emperors for centuries. In the East, it echoed as Kaiser. In Russia, as Tsar. To rule like Caesar became the measure of greatness. His calendar shaped time itself. His commentaries became a model of Latin prose, studied in schools for millennia. His conquests expanded Rome to the Atlantic, securing the empire's foundation. His life and death transformed history. But beyond the achievements, Caesar remains a paradox. Was he a tyrant who destroyed the Republic, or a visionary who saved Rome from collapse? Was he a ruthless conqueror who spilled rivers of blood, or a genius reformer who brought order to chaos? The truth, as always, lies in both. What cannot be denied is his greatness. Few men have risen so far, so fast, and left such an indelible mark on the world. From the Rubicon to the Ides of March, from Gaul to Egypt, Caesar's story is the story of ambition without limit. His fall was as dramatic as his rise, a reminder that even the mightiest are mortal. Yet, in another sense, Caesar never died. His shadow lived on in Augustus, in the empire that bore his name, in the very word Caesar, which would echo for 2,000 years. In every emperor, in every monarch who claimed the mantle of absolute power, there was a trace of him. The man who was born in the Subura, who was once hunted by Sulla, who was mocked by pirates, who crossed the Rubicon, who fell beneath the daggers of his friends, became more than a man. He became a legend, and in the end, legends never truly die.